welcome to the Zero Ends channel. Please like and subscribe. Please enjoy our live.
All right. Welcome again. And good evening, like always. And this is the 15th and final chapter of a wonderful book. I like to say myself. I do say so myself, actually. This is American Negro Slave Revolts, chapter 15. For any more information and obtain this book, you can go on Amazon to purchase this book personally, to read for yourself from chapter 1 through 15, for a better clarity, understanding, or something that you did not catch much. But the book is there. I think it's still on sale, maybe, possibly. I can't remember. But it's here, neither here or there. One thing I would like to say as I conclude this, and I probably will give my more overall view, even how the Negro dealt with slavery back then, even to now. And I would say this. With history itself, you got to look at for a bigger, broad brush or painting. And what I mean by this is that not everything is just simple as it looks. And one thing I've come to understanding that why there's a purpose why history has not really been taught to or taught correctly throughout all institutions of education, because it does hurt. It's painful. It could either build a sense of relief, a boost of self-esteem, or something more great or worse. But at the end of the day, history is history. A lot of people that wrote and kept documents of what went on for the last 2 centuries, or I could say even 4 centuries, here in the soil of North America. It's a testament of what they're trying to hide about this American Negro, man and woman, and what they really was and what their capable potential now. And obviously outside of America, everybody dealt with oppression differently and overcome it or still fighting it. But here in America is very special here. That the black man and black woman here are an anomaly of mixed cultures and other tribes that created what we call the American Negro today. Even if some of the black man that was already here in the soil mixed in with the African tribes from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, or wherever that was brought here through chains through the Atlantic Ocean, off across to the Ivory Coast of Africa to, the Atlantic Ocean and all those places, travels, where some have lost their lives and some have survived and made all the way up to the shores here in America. And there was one point even in the history that I'm not sure the book clarified, that there was a period where they had to stop importing American slaves. And usually that year was the end of the 1700s. I believe 1795, I believe. And during that period, there was what we call breeding farms, where they start breeding other slaves mixed with other slaves to create more of a more stronger buck. And there were consequences in that creation, because now, as you can tell, the typical Black America today can't really stop with his buck breaking behaviors, even not only to his own, well, actually, obviously is something that it was drained into him since he has been on this soil we call America. um but I can go on and on, but I will say no further ado. I'm gonna begin the reading, and this is titled Chapter 15. Chapter 15: The Civil War and the Years During the Civil War and After the Civil War. No matter how often or how vehemently politically and publicity might deny that the status of the Negro people was in any way involved or concerned in the war between the states, they themselves immediately sensed that their enslavement and the social order based thereon were the center around which everything revolves. They know more clearly and earlier than others that the army of Lincoln was to be an army of liberation. They therefore assisted. Nightly prayers arose from the 10,000 but for its success, or huts for its success. Hourly its emancipating were reached by scores of fugitives, and even early spring could not stop the flow, which soon reached flew proportions. From this came 200,000 workers for the Union Army to fell trees and dig trenches and cook food and drive wagons. Regularly came offers to serve in the ranks, and finally these were accepted. Then came 12 times 10,000 Southern Negroes to take part in the contest as to whether this nation might long endure. Men who, in the words of their commander-in-chief, with slight tongue and clenched teeth and steady eye and well-posed bonnet, helped making on the great consummation, though some 40,000 did not live to see it. And as spies, scout, and plot, they served as eyes and ears for the advancing strangers. Added to this wholesale flight were all the other means by which, for generations, the Negro people have fought back against enslavement: sabotage, strikes, insubordination, individual acts of violence, and conspiracies and rebellion. These things occur notwithstanding the fact that the measures of precaution and repression characterized of the slave society were frightened and added to at a dozen points, and noteworthy or notwithstanding the fact that the entire South was now one huge mobilized military camp. All right, let me continue. Thank you for your patience. There is evidence to demonstrate that the year of the Civil War witnessed considerable activity on the part of militant fugitives, slave outlaws, frequently operating together with the guerrilla band formed by deserting from the Confederate Army. Just prior to the outbreak of hostilities, there were reports of depredation committed by a gang of runaway slaves, acting together with two white men along the Combahee River in Louisiana. An expectation was set on foot to capture the whole party, but what success it had, if any, is not known. There appears in the Marine South Carolina Star on June 18, 1861, an unusual detailed account of a Maroon camp under the heading of runaways, and the account in part in follows. Last Tuesday, a party of gentlemen from this place went in search of runaways who were thought to be in a swamp 2 miles from here. A trail was discovered which, winding about much conduct, and the party to a knoll in the swamps on which corn, squash, and peas were growing, and a camp had been burnt. Continuing the search, another patch of corn, etc., was found, and a camp from which several Negroes fled, leaving two small Negro children, each about a year old, and there were several guns fired at the Negroes who fled from the camp, but none proved efficiently or ethically. The camp seems well provided with the meal, cooking, utensils, blankets, etc. The party returns, having taken the two children, 12 guns, and one axe. Means should immediately be taken for the capture of these runaways, as they are probably lurking about the place. And the Confederate Brigadier General R.F. Floyd asked Governor Milton on Florida on April 11, 1862, to declare martial law in Nassau, Darville City, or Clay, Putnam, St. John, and Volusian counties. As a measure of absolute necessity, as they contained a nest of traitors, the lawless Negroes. In October 1862, a scouting party of 3 armed white investigating a Maroon camp containing 100 men, women, and children in Surry County, Virginia, were killed by these fugitives. In January 1863, Governor Shorter of Alabama asked Secretary of War Sadon to dispatch reinforcements to the southeastern region of the state, which he said was the common retreat of deserters from our armies, territories, and runaways, and at the same time commissioned J.H. Clayton to destroy these disturbing elements. Colonel Hatchett of the Union Army reports in August 1864 that 500 Union men, deserters, and Negroes were raided towards Gainesville, Florida, and the same month a Confederate officer, John K. Jackson, declared that many deserters are collecting in the swamps and fastnesses of Taylor, Lafayette, Levy, and other counties in Florida, and have organized with runaway Negroes bands for the purpose of committing deportation upon the plantation and crops of loyal citizens and runaways off their slaves. These depredatory bands have even threatened the cities of Tallahassee, Madison, and Marianna. A Confederate newspaper noticed similar activities in North Carolina in 1864. It reports it's difficult to find word of description of the wild and terrible consequences of the Negro raid in this obscure theaters of the war. In the two counties of Currituck and Camden, there are said to be from 5 to 600 Negroes who are not in the regular military organization of the Yankees, but who outlaws and disowned by their masters led the lives of bandit roving from county with the fire and committing all sorts of horrid crimes upon the inhabitants. That's some serious guerrilla warfare. These present threat of guerrilla warfare has at this time a most important interest for our authorities. It is described as a rich country and one of the most important source of meat supply that is now accessible to our entities or our armies. Attempts at the rebellion among slaves who had not managed to flee were also far from rare during the war years. In addition to several concerned instances of this, one fine statement pointing to the existence of widespread disaffection and unrest, but these are couched in such general or indecisive terms as to create hesitancy in joining them with the more clearly established cases. Thus, a short time before the firing upon Fort Sumter, it was report from Charleston, South Carolina, and this is the report says. There has recently been a stampede of about 100 slaves from the interior of the state, about which but little is said, and of which I dare say you will and see nothing in the local paper. The demoralization, consequently, or the political disorder of the day has extended to the slave population. There is a manifesting uneasiness in this respect. Again, on May 30th, 1861, an individual in New Orleans wrote to an English friend, and this is what the friend said. The agricultural population, which is other countries furnish the fighting masses, is here, of course, intangible for the purpose and ever require armed power to keep it in order. There has been very alarming disturbances among the blacks on more than one plantation, and the assistance of authorities have been called in to overcoming the open resistance of the slaves. Several reports of this nature came from Mississippi, from Jackson County in August of 1862, and Governor Pettus heard warning that no more men could be spared for service against the internal foe. It was maintained that if this were not heeded, we may as well give it to the Negroes. Now we have to patrol every night to keep them down. Damn, that's a lot of work. And they said that your ancestors never fought back. They put in a lot of work just to get your oppressors to keep you foot on your neck, even after they can't even sleep at night. And this is going on during the mid 1800s, mind you. But let's go on. 6 weeks later, a Confederate officer wrote his superior from the same region that there were not sufficient white men on the plantation for proper control of the slaves, and that promiscuous influence have already been manifested upon many of these plantations. In the spring of the next year, the slaves in Mississippi were declared to the much demoralized. On some of the places, the Negroes are almost in a state of insurrection. Later in this year of 1863, unrestfulness and alarm prevailed in Alabama, while in the summer of 1864 there had been manifestations of insubordination and rebellion among the Negroes in Bolivar County, Mississippi. Concrete instance of conspiracy or revolt come from practically all of the slave states from January through April of 1861. There were persistent reports of unrest in South Carolina. In the first month, a plot headed by a white stone cutter of General or German descent was discovered among the Negroes of Columbia. From Charleston, and correspondent wrote on March 29, 1861, and this is what he wrote. A conversation which I could not help hearing at the Charleston Hotel last night convinced me that the disaffections among the slaves is more general than even I imagined. A member of the Constitutional Convention who comes from the district of Prince George was relatively to a friend circumstance of a plot which he had discovered the manifestation or ramification of which extended for miles around, and in which the servants of some scores of planters were concerning. The lead rebellion were unforceable lash or unmercifully lash. There is evidence indicating an attempt rebellion near Charleston in April 1861 resulted in a hanging of 7 slave leaders. During the same month, there were rumors of trouble in Lexington, Kentucky, while in May these seem to have become reality in a short-lived uprising in Owa and all that. Okay, let's reread that sentence. During the same month, there were rumors of trouble in Lexington, Kentucky, while in May these seem to have become realities in a short-lived uprising in Owens and Gallatin counties of that state. The river counties of Mississippi, particularly Jefferson, were distressed in May by discovering of a slave plot supposed to mature of the 4th of July. Now, mind you, the 4th of July was also back, depending this year, 1861, and back 1776, which is roughly almost 85 years ago when America got independence. So keep that in mind. About 5 whites were implicated with the Negroes. The governor was urged not to remove militants or volunteer companies from the area, and the incident set one resident to thinking where I could be on the most service to my county at home or in the army. You will see nothing but external vigilance. Will keep down the enemy at home as well as our frontier. Several of the Negroes were hanged, others involved in the plot in Charles City County, Virginia, again in May, got off more easily, receiving a stern warning and 30 lashes apiece. That's interesting. Very interesting. Okay, where was I? And there's a subtitle here, which y'all can read yourself. In June 1861, a plot was discovered in Maroon, Arkansas, and 3 of the leaders were executed. Reports of a similar nature recurring during the year, but the greater importance was the tremendous fire that swept Charleston in December and destroyed about 600 buildings, causing $7 million of damage, or $7 million of damage. This was generally ascribed to the slaves and usually, though not always, to their deliberate works. Several fires were set by slaves in Henry County, Kentucky, destroying numerous houses and barns. In the same month, it was reported that the general feeling of insecurity prevails throughout the entire community, and that the new castle, some 60 slaves, had on December 24th parade, singing political songs and shouting for Lincoln. While no one dares put them down, Adams County in the southwestern corners of Mississippi was the center of 1862 of a serious slave plot. The leader was a Negro named Orange, belonged to a Colonel Mosby, and the field slaves had communicated their plans to nearby Maroons, and it was asserted too that a white man painted like a Negro. Interesting. Very interesting. And was implicated. A few guns were found among the rebellion, and several of their leaders were hanged. Their bodies were left on public display for months, and the idea being to induce docility by adding the delightful bits to a scenery and atmosphere of the air. Let's read that again. A few guns were found among the rebellion, and several of their leaders were hanged. Their bodies were left on public display for months, the idea being to induce docility. Docility. Does that remind you of something? Of what goes on today, and not only in the 21st century now, where they show deaths of black men and black women? It's supposed to impose docility. That's old psychological warfare right there for y'all. Get it? Let's continue. By adding the delightful bits to a secretary of atmosphere of the air. General Butler, stationed at New Orleans, declared on August the 2nd, 1862, that an insurrection broke out among the Negroes a few miles up the river, which caused the women of the neighborhood to apply to an armed boat belonging to us, passing down for aid, and the incipient revolt was stopped by informing the Negroes that we should repel an attack by them upon the women and children. In November, serious uprisings occur amongst slaves about 15 miles north of Thoreau in Louisiana. I think it's called Theobald in Louisiana. The fact concerning the conspiracy in Culper County, Virginia, in October of that year have already been detailed. Disaffection among the slaves laboring in the virtual Trigari Iron Works in Richmond, Virginia, sprang up in May of 1863. It is known only that the leaders were punished. Again, few details are known about a plot in Hancock County, Georgia. And in October 1863, others that the fact that as a result of its disclosure, 18 slaves were imprisoned. Early this year in Florida and in South Carolina, plots and uprisings with the aim of getting the Union forces were discovered and suppressed by a detachment of the Confederate Army. The conspiracy in Richmond in June 1864 and the large-scale incendiary activities among slaves in Yazoo City, Mississippi, at about the same time have previously been noted. The uncovering of a plot in Brooks County, Georgia, in August 1864 led to a public meeting to appointment of an investigation committee of 12 and the hanging at the committee decision of one white man and 3 slaves. The next month in Annetta County, Mississippi, a group of about 30 armed slaves was attacked, and most of them were killed by Confederate troops. Plans for a widespread rebellion in the region of Troy, Alabama were revealed in December 1864, and it was declared that white men, deserters, and escaped Yankee prisoners were permanent in their foundation. And that so far as known as the last slave conspiracy within the present borders of the United States, and bring to the end of the narrative of the numerous plots and rebellions that persist rock America's slave society for over 2 centuries. So before I read the conclusion part, before I read this, let me do this. And it seems to me, it seems to me that that the myth that you were just taking it and you did not really seek for your own liberation besides the hands of Nat Turner, Demar Vesey, only 2 people or 2 Negro slaves at a time that perpetuate your chance or even perpetuate the notion of what we call actual freedom was not only a lie, but the history showed clearly that you've been rebelling since you've been on the soil. And knowing this, and for the clarity of this reading, and I hope y'all people will go back to re-listen to this or read the book yourself, is that the last document of this was in 1864. What happened the next year? The next year, the Civil War ended, and freedom was so-called abolished in America the next year. But before we got up to 1865, this was going on in America since 1600s or 1619 up to 1865, roughly, mind you. So, as y'all know, and as y'all got a thorough understanding of this, is that at the end of the day, and it's not really the end of the story yet, because there's more to this. I'm going to read the conclusion part of this. And to know that, you have come a long way, but there's still more work to be done up to this point. So let us now go to the final and last conclusion of this book. And I will have to say, in totality, is that this is really dealing with chapter 15 and 16. So I'll have to rechange that. Chapter 16, conclusion. There are few phases of antebellum Southern life and history that were not in some way influenced by the fear of or the actual outbreak of militant concerned slave action. In some cases, the influence were of a minor, if not of a merely formal nature. Such appear to be the case when Southern appeals for the exoneration of Louisiana in order to take it out of the hands of possible hostility and apparently revolutionary France, which might use that possession as a means of arousing slave rebellions in the United States. Similar arguments were used to justify other exoneration as those of East and West Florida and Texas, and pronouncement of imperialistic design such as Austin Manifesto. Another argument, however, used in all the territorial advancements of the slave society to the effects that the South needed new land in order to lessen the dangers of revolt by checking the concentration of Negroes within a limited area seemed to have been a rather important consideration in the minds of Southern leaders. Associating with the later idea was the colonization movement, which attempts to attack the problems of Negro concentration either by persuading or by forcing the free Negroes to leave, thus ridding the slave society of a living refutation of its rationalization. The governor of North Carolina, for example, was urged to further the case of American colonization society because it might rid us more expeditiously of our greatest pest and danger, the free people of color. It is that explains that fact that it has been shown to discover the slave conspiracies of suppression, of insurrection, as in 1800, 1816, and 1831, brought a research recitation of this colonization movement. Thus, one of the first proposals of such a plan that coming from New Jersey in 1772 and was put forth by one moved to write because of the recent plots in his own neighborhood. Yet, although most respectful channels of propaganda were friendly to it, and although governments and wealthy individuals liberally provide it with funds, the movement was an utter failure. An essential reason for this was the bitter and well night unanimous opposition of the Negro people themselves to any movement seeking to remove them from their homes. Do you get that? Well, let's read that again, because I don't think we got it the first time. An essential reason for this was the bitter and well united unanimous opposition of the Negro people themselves to be or to any movement seeking to remove them from their homes. Get it? Good. Another line of approach to the problem of containing Negro concentration was through restrictions on the slave importation. Measures have this as their inspiration were frequently passed by colonists or colonial states and federal governments, as has been noted, and such actions generally occurred during or immediately following periods of considerable servile unrest. But these efforts were also in large part of ineffective, undoubtable because of the powerful economic interests which profit by defying their provision. The prime motive of the part of the slaveholders of the antebellum South was to maintain of the type of social order. That's all it is, control. Internally, the ultimate threat to this stability was disaffection and unrest of the part of the slave, particularly organized militant activities threatened the order of security. Thus, it came about that a basic consideration in the formation of a legal, social, and theological aspect of pre-Civil War Southern life was how best to prevent or how most effectively to suppress mass Negro rebelliousness. Thus was fostered the Colosseum myth of the subhumanity of the Negro, a myth based on the entire social order, and which demands the corruption of political science or political science theologically and anthropology, which they had back then. Anthropology wasn't around back in the 1800s. Acceptance of this idea had to be demonstrated by all Negroes and whites in their daily behaviors, their mode of eating and speaking, their demeanor, their occupation and activities, their worshiping and love making, their every feature and phase of living had to acknowledge the inability, indeed the divine origins of the status quo. Failure to abide by this meant for the white authoritarianism, both social and economic, explicit, warned of overt punishment towards the featuring lashings, imprisonment, hanging for the Negro, sale, torture, and death. This was the foundation. Upon this was reared the structure itself. Laws hampered and prevailed the free Negro and finally called for his removal or enslavement. They told the slaves where that he might go, how, and when. They forbade him to learn to read or write, or to testify against a white man. This is during enslavement times, and probably after slavery, probably during Jim Crow, but this is dealing with before the end of slavery. Or to possess weapons, or to resist the demand and command of his master. The slaveocracy supplied overseers and patrolmen and city guards, militiamen, volunteer armed groups, and federal soldiers. But these were not always sufficient to allay the terror that ever underlay the life, like some dark, brooding evil spirit, and that became reality. At the first initiation, the slaves are plotting, the Negroes have rise. Instant action, blood, burning, flesh, swaying bodies was then the cry, and nothing else would do, so that vigilance, communities, and lynchings were so common as to become institutionalized. So, from this, violence towards the Negroes, including lynching, was institutionalized. That's why if you look at people that were hanged, even back then and some hang now, that you find out in the 21st century a little bit, it's institutionalized. And with institution, that means somebody is backing and protecting it to allow someone like a Negro man or woman to be hanged by non-white people. I mean, non-black people. My fault. White people mostly. So let's continue. And outstanding characteristics of an antebellum Southern economy life was in predominantly agrarian nature or agrarian in nature. Undoubtful, the fact that the institution of slavery froze billions of dollars of capital into human beings was a great importance in maintaining the way of life. But the belief that urban proletarian Negroes were difficult to control was a factor not to be overlooked in explaining the reluctance of the Southern rulers to do more than they did to bring their section life closer into lines with the prevailing trends of the 19th century. Philosophically, too, the effects was considerable. It has been demonstrated that the prevalence of revolutionary statements of slogans frequently reach the consciousness of American slaves and affecting their behaviors. The irreconcilability of a progressive political ideology with the persistence of commercialized, I think it's commercialized, plantation slavery was well understood by many Southern leaders. The fear that the form would lead to the destruction of the latter did much to hasten the South and the repudiation of Jeffersonism equilibrium doctrine or equilibrium doctrine. Back in 1794, a Virginia aristocrat pointed out that the Democrat favored the common poor people and asked, who so poor as our slaves, who therefore so fit to participate in the spoils of the rich and to direct the affairs of the nation? To the slaveocracy of the 19th century, the Declaration of Independence became but the mounting of an irresponsible and dangerous frantic of ridiculousnesses, high sounding concoctions of obvious absurdities. In words of Bishop Ellington, uttered in Savannah, February 23rd, 1862, the American people follow the revolution, declaring war against all authorities. The reason of man was exalted in the impious degrees and in the face not only of experience, but of the revealing word of God. All men were declared equal, and man was pronounced capable of self-government. Two greater falsehoods could not have been announced, because of one struck at the whole constitution of civil society as it had ever existed, and became the other denied the fall and corruption of man. Freedom for Negroes and poor whites was nothing but a shadow and an aspiration in the South, and the maintenance of slave systems in the South. In the midst of the nation founded upon a deep democratic faith, required or was believed to require repressive measures in the North as well as the South. Silence on the subject of slavery was demanded, and attack was made on the freedom of the male and the rights assuming the petition. Negro seamen of foreign nations and of the free states were discriminated against. The maltreated actions of a poor slavery caste, like the seizing of fugitive slaves, the employment of the army for slave control deities or duties, and the emancipation of expansionist settlements, had the support of exonerations adventurers, though distasteful to many citizens, were pressed towards. The anti-slavery struggle brought it into a battle for the security of the democratic rights of the white people. They developed was probably the most important force straightening the entire abolitionist movement. And one of the great causes of this was the fear of slave plots or rebellions, and the measures taken to prevent or subdue them. A more direct impetus to the movement came from the fact that the acute fear of rebellion that pervaded the South, and the frequent justification for the fear of actual conspiracies or uprisings, offer vulnerable agitational material. Surely it was pointed out that terror was a pinnacle condition for the mental state of custodians of a delightful patriarchal system, and certainly these plots and insurrections were inexplicable modes of behavior for docile contents servants. Moreover, it was asked, exactly where do bleeding backs, crop ears, banishment, and hanging fit into the dream of the paradise that is Doxy or Dixie? It is very interesting to observe how frequent were the occasions when the slaves had received aid from white people generally in the lower economic groups, and this notwithstanding the fact that the slaveholders deliberately attempt to weed out and destroy anti-slavery individuals and associations. Moreover, slaves' rebellions themselves and the elaborate, expensive system of control needed for the maintenance of a slave society foster opposition among the non-slaveholders, whites, and the lord of the county or the country. The expense comprised in compensation matters of executing or banishing slaves, of maintaining patrol guards, and entry material. Patrol guards and the entry military machine necessary for police purpose was met in part by non-slaveholders and was often resented by them. In addition, patrol duties itself was rarely pleasant and frequently dangerous, until most heavily upon poor whites who were unable to pay the fines imposed upon them who failed to perform it. The weakness from a military standpoint of the slave era was a prominent consideration in the minds of Southern and national leaders. And in times of stress, as during the Revolutionary of the War of 1812 and the Civil War, and measures taken into attempt to ensure continued subordination or to suppress evidence of unrest resulted in serious weakening of the powerlessness of the South. This as has been shown entered predominantly into the discussion pro and cons among dominant classes in the 1850s and down to the moment of decision as to the availability and pursuing the policy of secessions. One of the important cases aggravating the already served strain placed on the acquisitions of the poor whites and continued dominance by the Bourbons were certain of the precautionary measures, though necessary by the Confederate, particularly in which exempts from military service in the first conscriptions act one white owner of overseer for every 20 slaves, and which was later changed to one of every 15 slaves. This study has attempted to meet the need which has become increasingly evident in recent years, depicting of realistic terms responding to the American Negroes to his bondage. The data herein presenting makes necessary a revision of the general accepted notions that his response was one of the passivity and docility. The evidence of the commentary points to the conclusion that discontent and rebelliousness were not only exceedingly common, but indeed characterized of American Negro slaves. Let's read that one more time. The evidence in the contradiction. Let me read that whole paragraph again, because I want you to be clear, because this is the conclusion part. This study has attempted to meet the need which has become increasingly evident in recent years of depicting in realistic terms the response of the American Negro to his bondage. The data herein presented makes necessary to revision of the generalized accepted notion that his response was one of passivity and docility. Remember, that was the notion, if you know back in school, that they said your ancestors were passive and docile during their oppression. Yeah, there were some revolts, but only revolts happened were during Nat Turner and even the rumors of Denmark Vesey. But other than that, you did not revolt at all when you were in the soil. But through this last paragraph, which it concludes, says this: the evidence of the contrary points to the conclusion that discontent and rebelliousness were not only exceedingly common, but indeed characterized of the American Negro slave. This is common. throughout your history and throughout the history that they don't reveal or teach you. And that concludes American Negro Slave Revolts. Now, as y'all heard and heard from yourself, and heard from what I just read, chapter 15 and 16, the conclusion. It is said in presence that you're not docile. You're not, even right now, the way how America is and where it's going to be going. A fallen empire, nonetheless. And your position in this country has shown testament that you're not supposed to be a docile or what they call a feeble or a scared Negro. Your ancestors never were about that. And they were not about that back then, over 2 centuries. And even now, you're shown a different behavior. And the reason why you don't act and behave the way you are back in enslavement and during Jim Crow now is because by default you have been comfortable in your oppression. Because now, throughout, even at the end of civil rights movement, which enacted the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was almost look at 95 years after the freeing of slaves, your oppressor has played a bigger chess move on you, and it has worked up to this point where you have become even more docile. You have not even fought to really get your actual piece of pie of this country, the wealth, which only I think only 1 or 2% of Negroes only got tapping, only that small fraction of percent, while all other non-blacks have 97 or 98% of the wealth. That is not by coincidence. That is by design, as y'all know. And then wrapping up and closing on this. Even when you hear about most people that talk about revolution, you have no idea. Anybody that served in the military know what warfare is, both intellectual and physical. And if y'all study actual warfare, even up to your history of your position in this country back then, that you will not get nothing unless you fight this oppressor. Now, most Negroes today in the 21st century will, or even let's say better, 20th century going on to 21st century, will take the more docile, passive approach. And then they'll get the same results. But if you look throughout your history, if you study history and know it well, you know, to get you to this part, you're going to have to confront this enemy one way or the other, which will not end in nicely and in some type of bloodshed, one way or the other. We don't know. We just don't know. But no say your actions and how you view yourself and your purpose, even you look at yourself as lesser than or something because your ancestors, your grandparents and all that stuff, centuries were slaves and you're not a slave. You are more of a slave now more than ever because you accept your will. You do not put up a decent fight now. A good majority of the black population here in America doesn't even put an attempt to compete at a high level. We still give our time and energy working for someone else. And we all know where that leads up at the end. And even now, we look at this new century. We're only in the first generation, the first 20 years of the 21st century. And how things move accelerating now because we are in a technical age now. We're moving off of agricultural to industrial age the last century. Now we're moving at the technical phase now in the 21st century. The only thing you see moving forward is only things going to speed up because now we have technology. So you as a young man or woman today, you must make use of the resource you have now in the 21st century. And before you even use the resource you have now, if you get any or you have to create one yourself, black man, black woman, you must understand your place in history. What you really have to do moving forward to get the goal, which is actual full autonomy, freedom, and even go as far as become and be in power. It will not be easy plateau to reach. But if you understand where you are, where you're at now, and where you need to go, that to achieve the greater goal will be much faster than you will see it. But then again, like I said before, you have to understand where you are now, where you have been in the past, and where you potentially can go in the future. And that's the reason why history, as we know, is never left into something in the past. Whatever is in the past affects you now in the present and will continue affecting you in the future. You see now that they kill black men more now wholesale than they did in any war in this country. Now, is it our fault as black men? We could say yes. Is there things that we could change it? Yes, we could. Now, how we change it? You have to understand the past to understand where you are in present and where you have to move forward in the future. There's no other way around this. You're not getting around this. And I hope throughout this whole entire book, it shows a proper template of the history, the actual history. So you get a more respect of what your people have done to put you in positions where you are today and where you need to go in the future. Like I said before, this was a very good book. I would advocate every parent, especially mothers, have this book in their libraries for your children, for your daughters, and for your sons, especially for the boys. They have to really have a full understanding of their history. I get tired sometimes hearing young adults where they have no appreciation or have no emphasis to understand and respect the history. And I'm not talking about the history of each. I'm talking about history that made you or brought you during your enslavement, because that's the dark side of our history. We have to, as a people, get a full understanding, a full clear understanding. That's the only way you're gonna move forward. There's no way around it. And I feel just not only teaching but having him or her read it for themselves, they'll have a better respect for it. Trust me, I know. I know. I believe they will have a better respect. Um, so, like I said, this was a very well written book. The Like I said, the link is there for where you can get the book yourself, read it for yourself. There are subtitles to the book and also some bibliography as well to give more insight of the little sub newspaper and sections of the history. I advise you read that. And like I said, this book came out in the 40s. So right now, if I do the math on this book is roughly 77 years old. Yeah. So it's an old book. You know. So all right. So other than that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to this stream, this podcast. The next new reading that I will present will be very soon. So like always, if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel. Also you'll find season 1 of Chaos Rain channel is on all podcasts now. So check it out. And that's pretty much it. So thank y'all for listening in to the 15th and 16th chapter, the final chapter of American Negro Slave Revolts. Until next time, take care.